Hello and welcome to the Center for LGBTQ and Gender Studies. I apologize, there was supposed to be audio with that clip beforehand, but having a little bit of Zoom trouble today. Welcome to the first workshop in our Queering the 2024 series. My name is Bernie Schlager. I use he, they pronouns, and I serve as Executive Director of the Center for LGBTQ and Gender Studies, CLGS, here at Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley, California. Today, we welcome the Reverend Michael Neuroth, who is Director of the United Church of Christ's Office of Public Policy and Advocacy in Washington, D.C., who will be speaking with us today about the UCC's 2024 Our Faith, Our Vote, Vote with Love campaign. Elections do matter, and they determine who represents us in government and set policy for our common life together. Voting is not only our civic duty, but also can be understood as a sacred act of love on behalf of the most vulnerable. As Christians, civic engagement is how we live out the commandment to love one's neighbor and speak up for those in need. In 2024, as we face an election with cynicism, polarization, and extremism as all facets of it, we are called to dig deeply to find what unites us and resist forces that would disenfranchise, discourage, or even dehumanize voters. For over 20 years now, the United Church of Christ's Our Faith, Our Vote campaign has encouraged members to engage faithfully in democracy through voter registration, issue education, and voter empowerment. As people of faith, we are called to strengthen our democracy by exercising a sacred duty to vote and ensure that all are able to vote for their values. Let me say a word about our speaker, the Reverend Michael Neuroth. Again, as I said before, he serves as Director of the United Church of Christ's Office of Policy and Advocacy on Capitol Hill in Washington. And prior to serving as director, Michael worked for 15 years as the denomination's policy advocate for international issues and led the DC office's work on international peace, human rights, and economic justice issues. Michael holds an MDiv, THM, and MSW degrees from Princeton Seminary and Rutgers University, and he resides in Washington with his wife, Amber, their two boys, and a golden doodle, good choice, named Chewy. And then just some housekeeping details. This event is being recorded and will be live streamed, or is being live streamed on Facebook and YouTube. We will not be recording or showing any chat features. And let's see, what else should I say? I think that's it. We often have requests from people to turn off blurry backgrounds or virtual backgrounds that can interfere with people who have vision or migraine challenges. So once again, we welcome Michael and thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Bernie, and good to be with all of you in this virtual space here today. I appreciate that introduction, Bernie. I have been the director now for about a year, and our office has worked on this campaign for several years on behalf of the denomination. So for today, what I really thought I'd do is I will give you all a little bit of my elevator speech, and Bernie touched on some of those themes in the introduction, and then really we'll open up for some questions and answers. I'm happy to talk about not only this Our Faith, Our Vote campaign, but also the faith-based advocacy work that we do here in Washington, along with interfaith partners, in case you all have questions about any of that work. But let me go ahead and talk a bit about our Faith, Our Vote campaign. As Bernie mentioned, we know this election is critical for all of us, but particularly for the LGBTQIA+ community. We are seeing unprecedented systemic attacks on everything from bodily autonomy via access to safe abortion and gender-affirming care to attacks on marriage equality and education. With over 540 anti-LGBTQIA bills in state legislatures this year, the proactive response from us is needed more than ever. And that response, as we in our office here have defined it, needs to be doubling down on love, as simple as it is. Love is going to be a consistent theme throughout what I talk about today. It's the theme of our campaign this year. The theme is vote with love. I know you're going to hear from my colleague Rachel Ward here in just a couple weeks, who's going to talk specifically about our LGBTQIA campaign and advocacy work through the Love is Louder project that they run. But really today I wanted to lean into how we've kind of partnered with Rachel, but really are focusing on this particular election campaign. So our Faith, Our Vote campaign is the United Church of Christ ongoing commitment to equip our churches with tools for nonpartisan, let me say that again, nonpartisan, faithful engagement in our democratic process. We believe that our democracy, our public voice is sacred, it's fragile, and demands our active vigilance and involvement. The hope for this campaign is really to elevate discourse and activity, to support local church initiatives and engagement, and ultimately to strengthen our elections and our democracy by offering accurate information, concrete ways to be involved, and language and encouragement to connect our faith to these efforts, and ultimately to overcome apathy with hope. I know for many of us, at the start of this year, the sense of apathy and disconnect was palpable. Some of that has changed over the past few months, but even still, part of the reason for our theme for this year was really to center hope, to center love. This election is not about necessarily two candidates and loving either one of them. It's about voting for who we love, for what we love in this world. And so those are the issues that we talk about in this campaign. So our Vote with Love theme is really resonating with our churches and members. The guiding scripture for the program this year, this campaign, is 1 John 3:18, which is, "Let us not love with words or speech, but in action and in truth." So in this passage, we see it calling us to center love in our approach, especially given the polarization we see in the world around us. We also see this passage calling us to move beyond just words toward action and to ground that action in truth at a time when misinformation and disinformation is also so rampant. And we're addressing that in various different ways. Our hope is that by centering love in this election season, we're also living into our mission as the United Church of Christ, which is to welcome all, to love all, and to seek justice for all. So in a little bit, I will paste some other links in the chat about kind of what this campaign is about. But let me just give you a little bit more of the what and the how of the campaign itself. So the campaign itself is made up of three main components, which Bernie mentioned, which is voter registration, issue education, and voter empowerment. So for us, voter registration is somewhat obvious, but really just to mention the fact that churches play a unique role in society insofar as they are very much relational hubs within our communities. We all know, even in this time when there's great decline in the church, churches are still, spread throughout our cities. And they, really are places where people come and still gather and have a footprint in communities across the country. And they are also purveyors of trusted information, which again, in this day is somewhat rare. So that, again, leaning into churches being places where that can share information on voter registration is key. And so as such, we maintain a civic action center where people can, on our website, which allows people to check the registration, other information. With this, we also, in terms of voter registration, we have been supporting a vote tripling campaign to encourage members to reach out to 3 friends and ask them to pledge to vote. We know that in the Great Commission, Jesus sent people out with a partner. And so we're leaning into that and asking folks to triple their voice by asking 2 friends to join them in committing to vote this year. Again, leaning into the relational potential of our congregations. The focus really is not only about getting our own members to vote. And by the way, in so many of our churches, when we ask, when I meet with folks, they say, yes, our church is 100% registered. Well, stats show that is not the case, that our voter registration in our churches and our communities is still so low that we really do need to remind our folks in our churches, even progressively minded, active congregations, to get out and vote themselves, and to get out and encourage folks in their community and low propensity voters to vote. So we are part of, in the next few weeks, we are working with 2 different kind of voter registration efforts. One is the Center for Common Good, which really targets voters of color in different states, and through postcarding campaigns, through phone banking and text banking. So a number of our churches have engaged in that work and have filled out thousands of postcards to go to those states, to go to those communities as a reminder to vote and to register. We're also working with the Poor People's Campaign that have identified other low propensity voters, in this case, low income and workers, to remind them to get out the vote, because studies show that, again, these are communities that oftentimes are not being reached out to, and that when they are reached out to, the percentage at which they increase their likelihood to vote increases significantly. So those are 2 of our partners that we are starting to share information about, starting in October, to encourage our churches to engage in those efforts. Issue education is another part of our campaign. Again, leaning into the fact that churches can be a trusted source of information. So we are hosting a series of webinars throughout this fall on a variety of election-related topics. So I did one just a couple weeks ago with our UCC General Counsel on do's and don'ts for churches. So IRS rules for 501c3 organizations like churches, and what they can and can't do. And really the theme of that was be bold, not partisan, or be prophetic, not partisan. So often our churches actually are not or because of the fear about overstepping those guidelines, they're not pushing as far as they could in terms of engaging in simple get out the vote issue education efforts. And they're choosing not to talk about the election as much as they could from the pulpit in nonpartisan ways. So we had we had over 250 people on that webinar. Lots of people have downloaded it and viewed it offline as well. I'm happy to share a link to that here when I'm done. We're also doing one is going on right now on toxic polarization. And as I speak, my colleague One Room Over is leading that webinar with the One America movement. It's one of a handful of organizations across the country that are really leaning into what is the nature of the toxic polarization that's dividing our communities, and what can we do to address that, and particularly things like having hard conversations around the dinner table. Where can we stand together in times like this, not as a way of just lowering the bar on our discourse and dialogue and positions, but rather on trying to, as people of faith, find where we do have common ground and where can we start. And again, for us in this campaign, that is love. We're also planning a webinar on October 31st around misinformation and disinformation, as well as talking about potential election scenarios around if it's a contested election, all those kind of matters, using the language of don't be scared, be prepared for Halloween. And we may or may not dress up in costume. I can't promise that, but it'll be that theme. So again, all this is around issue education. And then finally, there's an element within that education around spiritual formation. So we're also organizing a Vote Faithfully Sunday service, which is going to be held on November 3rd. Material should be posted, I hope, by early October. And that'll be a way for our churches, many of our clergy who struggle with how to talk about these issues, in church, in a service. We'll have liturgies, suggested music, as well as resources to weave into their Sunday service. We're going to have a video message from our general minister and president, Reverend Dr. Karen Georgia Thompson. So we're in the process of working on that resource as well. Lastly is voter empowerment and get out the vote. I mentioned this a little bit in terms of we're partnering with Center for Common Good and the Poor People's Campaign around the get out the vote efforts. But we also offer tools and resources to support election protection. We are part of the National Election Protection Coalition that maintains the Voter Protection Hotline, which is 1-866-OUR-VOTE. So folks are seeing irregularities at the polls, are seeing things that need to be reported. That is the hotline that people can call to report those, as well as information around just how quickly voting regulations are changing in some states. We're really leaning on the Brennan Center and other resources to get out that information, to make sure people are aware of what those regulations are. And our Civic Action Center offers some of that information too. Finally, we've partnered with 2 different other coalitions. One is called Power to the Polls, which is essentially a nonpartisan election poll worker recruitment campaign. And so we're sharing information about that to try to encourage our members to be poll workers. And then as well, this is new this year, which is there's a effort called Faiths United to Save Democracy, which is also recruiting and training clergy and lay people to be poll chaplains. And really in that work, and there might be a couple trainings left if folks are interested. The website is turnoutsunday.org, Faiths United to Save Democracy. And the poll chaplain program really is trying to get people not to be poll workers, but to stand outside and try to de-escalate where and when there might be tension and other voter intimidation occurring at polls. So to have a clerical presence there, a trained peacemaker presence there, and they've had from the 2022 and 2000 election looking at mapping out where some of those states and polling places are that had tension then, to make sure they're deploying folks to be prepared for that for this coming November. There are a couple of dates to keep in mind around kind of our get out the vote efforts, which is National Voter Registration Day is September 17th. October 29th is Vote Early Day, and obviously November 5th is Election Day. Finally, let me just say a little bit about what makes this election different from others. And there's a lot that could be said here. Again, this is in part because of the, I come at this from someone who's worked for 15 years on foreign policy. And so, I do think that in some ways this is going to be a foreign policy election. And we saw a little bit of that in last week's debate. Even before, this last debate, we know that Gallup poll showed that in their polling, immigration is now one of the top, not just one of, but actually the top issue in this election, in terms of who ranked that as being the most important, which is rare. Usually it's the economy, right? But this year that really is what's motivating people. And then this is an election that's taking place in the context of two wars, right? The ongoing war in Ukraine, the ongoing war in the Middle East. We know that early on, there's been the uncommitted vote that happened in some of the Great Lakes states. And so that remains a contour of this election as well. And finally, there's certainly attacks. This is where this election is taking place after there's been so many attacks on voting rights itself. 11 years ago, the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in Shelby versus Holder, or it took out critical elements of the Voting Rights Act and further rolled back affirmative action recently. So we still are pushing outside of this campaign, but in the context of the work that we do here in the DC office of pushing for voting rights legislation, such as the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. And then as I started with, this is an election which we're seeing mostly in states, but also, debates at the Supreme Court and elsewhere, attacks on LGBTQIA folks, again, with more than, around 550 anti-LGBTQIA bills that are up in state houses around the country. That is another aspect of this election. So given all this, really just to harken back to the theme for us is vote with love. And we are really trying to keep the message simple and hopeful, but leaning into that as our faith identity and really as a call to action for this election. So let me go ahead and stop there, and I'm going to put a few links in the chat and really open it up. Actually, before I do that, let me share my screen. I'd love to show you all our website itself so that you can see what the campaign looks like. Let me put some links in the chat first. And I put at the top several are all our Faith or Vote links. The bottom two, one is the UCC Love Out Loud campaign that you are going to meet with Rachel in a few weeks on. And then finally, it's the LGBTQIA task force, which has a great page on queering the vote that I thought might be appropriate to share today. But let me go ahead and share my screen really quickly. Hope you all can see that. So you'll see here's the our Vote with Love graphic. Here is the voter registration link. So folks, this is where we're trying to really push people to check their registration. Here is that page where people can make sure that they're registered. We have their general voter registration resources, issue education resources. We've really been doing a great blog, which I'll link to here to show you. This has been with the national staff of the United Church of Christ. A lot of my colleagues here have contributed to the blog on a number of issues, point of intersectionality. So I just did one this week around this coming Sunday is Just Peace Sunday for the UCC. So talking about the issues of connection around peace and conflict, peace and security issues. We have ones on extravagant welcome. We have recent ones on affordable housing written by my colleague who's the head of the Council for Health and Human Services around housing. We have one here on trans rights and justice. We have one on economic issues, one on voting rights, call to become a poll worker, poll chaplain that I mentioned earlier, disinformation. Again, there's many blog posts here that can be used and shared. And then on the website, you'll see too, we have messages from our general minister and president. We have worship resources that, again, the toolkit is coming soon for Vote Faithfully Sunday. And then just to say at the bottom, We have yard signs that folks can purchase. And so if this theme is resonating with you, I encourage you to go online and purchase a yard sign to proclaim vote with love in your communities. So with that, let me stop sharing. And again, I'm happy to maybe start with answering questions as I close my blinds here. I see I'm getting blasted by the sun. Answer questions about the Our Faith, Our Vote campaign specifically at first, and then if folks really want to ask more about the context in which I work here in Washington, which is really with the broader faith community and lots of initiatives happening here in DC. So let me close my blinds, but ask you to think of some questions and I'll be right back.
And folks, for a question, feel free to unmute yourself, turn on your camera if you're speaking, or place questions in the chat. I have a number of questions from Facebook and YouTube, but let me defer to folks in the room here. And anyone who would like to ask a question, please go ahead. I have one here. I don't see anyone yet, but just interrupt me. This is from Facebook. Someone is saying, Michael, how important do you think letter writing is in getting out the vote? And how important is canvassing door to door?
I'm assuming that is like postcarding.
I think so.
Yeah. It's a good question. I think, I met with Andrea Miller, who's the head of Center for Common Good this past week. I was on a webinar that she was leading. And really it's about timing more so than it is what's more effective. So I think all are effective, all are important. But postcarding is one that we can start to do now as a way, start collecting postcards, writing the addresses, all those kind of things now, and then sending them out here. Some of those windows for when to send them just opened up or are about to open up. And then in terms of phone banking or text banking, those really need to happen right before the election. So like 2 to 3 weeks out of those final reminders. So I think all are important. Again, as I mentioned, really seeing the need to kind of have the two organizations that we're partnering with, and there's many different probably that are active in your community or that you might work with, but the two for us are really focusing on the low propensity voters, primarily through people of color, through the Center for Common Good, and then through the Poor People's Campaign, which is low wage workers, low income folks. Again, as folks that often get overlooked in terms of engaging in by those that are doing get out the vote activities.
Thank you. Sarah Carter here in the room. Sarah, I don't know if you want to say more about your question. Your question is, what are the other initiatives happening in DC? I don't know if you want to say a bit more about that question or.
Yeah, I was just curious because you mentioned you work with another organization in DC, and you said that they were doing other initiatives. So I was just curious what you meant by that at the very end.
Yeah. Well, I'll say just broadly, folks may not know of the kind of networks that exist here in Washington. So we, the United Church of Christ, and most of the other mainland Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, Muslim, faith-based organizations all connect with each other in different ways, and are all, many of whom, about 80 of us, are all part of what's called the Washington Interreligious Staff Community, or we call it WISC. And so we partner in that network here. And as such, there are about 20 different working groups on any number of issues, both domestic policy and international policy. And one of those working groups, just to, again, to keep focus around the election, one of those working groups is called Faithful Democracy, where we work with a wide range of, all these are kind of coalitions of the willing. Not every faith community has a robust presence here in Washington. Many do. And so, but Faithful Democracy has been a collaborative effort over a number of years. So really active in that space include a network, which is the Catholic Social Justice Lobby, Sojourners, Interfaith Alliance, and then several other mainline Protestant denominations, some of the Catholic religious orders, and others. So, and I'm happy to talk about any of the, the number of issues that some of those working groups are taking on as well. But in terms of election work, Faithful Democracy is kind of our working group here, where we collaborate, and that is primarily focused on voting rights and legislative work, whereas our Faith or Vote camp, each of us also often have our own election campaign, get out the vote, issues education campaigns, so that we don't do together. We tend to do those internally. So.
Thank you, Sarah and Michael. This is from Davison here in the Zoom room. How do the liturgy and suggested music change in the Vote Faithfully services?
Yeah. How does it change? I think just each year we have picked a different theme. And so this year, again, we're leaning into Vote with Love. And so we're going to center the scripture that we picked to kind of meditate on and focus on in this campaign. So a lot of the resources are going to reflect that theme, that scripture, and then kind of the creative, where the Spirit moves, those who write these resources. And that is primarily our Cheryl Lindsay, who's our UCC staff that curates our worship materials. So she is working with a number of writers to help draft those. And the hope is to offer not just like one prayer, but one sermon, but a number of different tools and resources that clergy can use that they may want to draw from, because especially on these issues, an angle that one person would take may not be the angle that you want to take, or a theme that you want to focus on. So we're hoping to offer a few different resources in that toolkit.
Thank you. And I have a rather long question here from YouTube from Angela. See if I can read it. How do you suggest motivating younger people to vote, especially people of all ages who might not feel it is okay to vote for either candidate given positions on the war in Palestine or on other social justice issues you may not agree with?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I will say our on the particular issue of Israel-Palestine, I can mention that a little bit earlier, but on the blog I had highlighted our Middle East Global Relations Minister is going to be offering a reflection along those lines on October 22nd. Is when that will come out. That is going to center this question of the uncommitted vote and kind of what is our call in the midst of the ongoing conflict in the Middle East and war in Gaza. So that's a complicated issue. And in terms of how we motivate young people, that's also a challenge, certainly. But not to just kind of keep hammering our particular theme, but that is in part how we came up with the Vote with Love focus this year, was knowing that, at the time, especially, that neither candidate, there's issues with both candidates, and there still are, and that we need to be motivated not, because of the candidate, but again, to be voting out of the values that we stand for as people of faith, and ultimately to use the lens of love to direct our actions. And so I think that young people might resonate with that. Really a simple but real empathetic call to be motivated to vote and move through the apathy that a lot of young people were expressing, and still some are still expressing around the lack of actions and foreign policy positions of both parties, but really that however uninspired the options may be, that our call is still to vote with love and to bring about a world that reflects that. And so it's, to emphasize, again, this is our responsibility, not in a, this is just what you have to do because you have to do it, but really to say, like, this is our opportunity. This is our chance to shape the future. And you are the ones with the power to shape that. And you are not going to shape it by sitting it out. You're going to shape it by showing up. And so how do we show up in love at the polls? How do we show up in love in our communities? That needs to be the narrative rather than stepping out.
Thank you. And this is from Justin on Facebook. How is your office, or how can we prepare for the possibility of violence after November 5th?
Yeah, that's a good question too. I mentioned earlier the resource around being poll chaplains. So there are several trainings happening. That one is through Faith United to Save Democracy. Our UCC office has also put out a few different webinar trainings as well on de-escalating and really trying to have a trauma-informed response post-election, knowing that whatever happens, even if it's, obviously if there's direct violence, leaning on folks in our community that are trained as peacemakers, peace builders, who know tactics of de-escalation is really key, but also even beyond direct physical violence, the ways in which the narratives, the media may be exerting violence on people in our communities, depending on, in some ways, irregardless who wins, but certainly that will have a big effect of the need for trauma care and spiritual support for folks as they process the results of the election, as well as possible election scenarios where tension and violence might increase rapidly. So we're doing, as I mentioned, on October 31st, we're going to be leaning into that some more, looking at what those scenarios might be and how to be prepared for them. So that'll be a focus of that time.
Thank you. And I wanted to welcome to the Zoom room here, President David Vasquez-Levy from PSR. Welcome, David.
Thank you very much, Bernie. It's great to be with you all. And thank you, Michael, for your presentation today and for the work that you are doing at this critical intersection at PSR. We are grateful for the partnership with the United Church of Christ. That is a historical long-term commitment for PSR as one of the UCC schools. I'm also grateful for the partnership in many ways with President and, with our ministry, with Georgia, Karen Georgia's leadership. She and I served together on the Church World Service Board, and that work has certainly built our connections to each other, but also the awareness about the issues that you are highlighting. Church World Service, for those of you who may not be familiar, is one of the largest agencies that works around refugee resettlement. And so the election that is before us will determine a lot about the work around immigration and the responses and how we engage a world that is on the move. And so when I echo the significance of what you have discussed and presented, I want to also celebrate the work that UCC is doing to encourage this vote with love. And the question that was asked earlier about motivating young people that feel disenfranchised, but also or feel that some of their core values are not represented. I value your response to that, and I think that whether it's looking at the work of PSR, Church World Service, the UCC, I think that one way to think about this moment is that it's not a choice about two individuals. It's really a choice about different worldviews. We certainly have to wrestle with the fact that as a nation, not just in the United States, but globally, there is increased polarization. And so that means that at times it's hard to build solidarity because everything feels like all or nothing, right? And it's hard to get attention to the issues that we care deeply about. But it is that weaving of community that is so significant that needs to be done. Here at PSR, in addition to this series that is focusing on the importance of queering the vote, of challenging some of those binaries that are shaping our nation and our ability to be in the in-between, is also combined with efforts on our part to engage theologically in public discussions about the role of AI and Christian nationalism on our democracy. That series starts next Tuesday, also here at PSR and online. And then also another series that we're doing on migration, boundaries, and borders in the ancient world through our museum and the Bade Museum. For us as an institution, we're grateful for the opportunity to have you with us, Michael, for each of you, and just how critically important it is that we do engage with one another, to think creatively, to encourage one another, and to think about in what ways are we going to weave back our community, not just in this particular election and down ballot elections, but really, as you described towards the end of your comments, how do we live together beyond the election? I think there is an opportunity for our faith communities, our churches, to play a significant role in the rebuilding of community, of trying to reach, reweaving a sense of wholeness in our community. So we're grateful for that opportunity to be in conversation with you.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And just to say, I was also going to put a link to our newsletter here, in part because part of what we highlighted for September was actually a webinar series that Church World Service is doing. And just say I used to be on their staff as their UN representative many years ago before I came back to the UCC. But I think especially at this time, I'm trying to think if I can find it really quick, what the title of their series is. But they, given what we heard this week and this most recent debate, these questions around migration and immigration and really the dehumanization, as Bernie mentioned, this needs to be part of what motivates us to vote with love and to get our friends and our families out to vote with love in this election.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. There's one more question. This one is from YouTube, but I want to defer if there's anyone else in the room who has a comment or a question, please unmute or put in the chat. So this final question from the other venues, is it ever helpful in trying to dispel misinformation when speaking with others about an election? And that's from Alice. Thank you, Alice.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, number one, continually highlighting the fact that there is so much misinformation, disinformation. The disruptive AI conversation sounds like you're going to be having is central to that right now, where there literally is so much content being churned out. And so how do we as citizens muddle through all the information and really determine what's real, what's true? That is a call. And again, we'll be doing that as part of webinar on October 31st. We're also going to be addressing head-on misinformation. And on our blog, we had our UCC media justice staff did a blog post on misinformation, disinformation that I'll put the link into here in the chat. So it's critical that we engage in that work. I'll say, to add to that, it's uniquely critical for the faith community because we, again, are trusted voices of accurate information, because of the role that we play in our communities, because of the trust that the community has for faith leaders in being, and we know that is being abused, certainly, by some faith leaders who are peddling in misinformation, disinformation. But really do need to step into that role as faith leaders to speak truth in this time, and particularly around the election. So we're going to be partnering with the organization on the 31st to really try to dispel these myths and any critical misinformation that is coming out about the election.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from folks? I did want to mention before I thank you more fully, Michael, the next event in this series, let's see if I can get it to go here, will be on the 25th, and it'll be focusing on working within a particular congregation. CLGS staff member, Reverend Jacob Hero Shaw, who is an MCC minister in Tampa, Florida, will be speaking on elections as are a queer thing, and talking about ways to work within one's own faith community around the upcoming election. So a big thank you to you, Michael, for your work, for your presence here, for your presentation. Thank you, everyone here in the Zoom room, on YouTube and Facebook, for being a part of this. Please spread the word. We're having a little bit of a challenge getting the word out about this due to some of the ways our ads are being blocked. But in any event, thank you again, Michael. Thank you, David, for being here. And thanks everybody else for taking part in this event. And do check out our website for more information on what we are doing, more resources, and upcoming program. So thanks again, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.
All right, thank you. Good to be with you.
Thank you, Michael.